And Rogan says he won't do a podcast unless an in-person podcast unless people are wearing headphones, because then he's like, people, you used to get disoriented, you can't hear who's talking, and then everybody's talking at once.
Yeah.
So just a little podcast lore for you. I don't know. He's only the #1 podcaster in the world by far. So why wouldn't I take his advice?
Can we edit in the crickets sound?
Wow. All right. Well, welcome everybody to BeerNet Radio. We're doing our Wednesday warehouse segment where we talk about the week's news. Today we have Jordan Driggers in the studio. Hello, Jordan.
Hola.
And we have Jen Litz-Kirk in Austin. And we have Bianca Bruno in San Diego, which of course, as we all know, means Saint Diego.
Well done.
Nice save.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the stories that we worked on. I guess I'll go first. I've only worked on 2 stories, so I guess I'll just talk about those. And they both involve D9. And so I guess when we started reporting on D9, I had, it's extracted from hemp, right? Industrial hemp, which is legal under the Farm Bill. And it has 0.3% THC. And I just assumed that producers got a whole lot of hemp and then just pulled out that 0.3 THC. It turns out that's wrong. That's not what they do. Now, some people claim to do that, but from what I've heard, even the people who are claiming to do it probably don't do it because it's very costly. It's very tedious to do it that way. You need a whole lot of hemp. Really what they're doing is they're taking the stalk of the hemp plant, which looks like a marijuana plant, and then they take the CBD out of that, the cannabinoid, whatever it's called, and then they pour it with sulfuric acid and other agents, and it converts the CBD molecule to a THC molecule. So that's called D9. That's what D9 is. If you read Monday's issue, we talked about how that senator from Kentucky with the jowls, what's his name?
What's his name?
Yeah, Mitch McConnell. I'm sorry, I forgot his name. I'm pulling a Mitch McConnell, right? I'm freezing up. Mitch McConnell was getting all kinds of hell from his tobacco farmers because nobody smokes anymore because Congress made it, they taxed it so high that nobody can afford to smoke. So they're giving him hell. And so he's like, hey, what about hemp? Before they scheduled marijuana, hemp was a huge cash crop in the Southeast. And they would make fiber out of it and clothes and everything. And so that was his olive branch to his constituency. So in the 2018 Farm Bill, they said, hey, you can grow hemp, but it can't have more than 0.3% THC by dry weight. Everybody's like, fine. Perfect. What he didn't count on, but should have been predictable, is that you can't stop Americans from finding drugs and everything. Americans will find a way. And they found a way. They walked that shit into a lab, poured a bunch of shit on it, and see what would convert it to THC. And that's exactly what they did. And the presumption was, because of the way the Farm Bill was written, anything that comes out of that plant is not scheduled. Okay? Not scheduled means legal. However, the FDA, another government agency, has not approved CBD or hemp or anything out of that plant to be classified as safe to go into food or beverages. So it's illegal from an FDA standpoint, but not from a DEA standpoint. And plus, anyway, the DEA is not prosecuting or busting any kind of marijuana anyway, because they got too much going on with opioids and fentanyl, and it's just leave that alone. So what we have is a free-for-all. A good old American loophole, driving a train through a loophole, free-for-all. And I love it. I love it. I love when government accidentally legalizes something that they didn't want to legalize. And so basically now it's just like alcohol after repeal. Because what happened with the 21st Amendment? They left it to the states to regulate alcohol any way they want it. And trust me, my entire 25-year career covering this, it's been lawsuit after lawsuit trying for the federal government to try and take more control, or the courts rather, over alcohol. And they mostly hit a brick wall because the Constitution's very clear. It's left up to the states. And I can see a world where cannabis is heading down that path. Now, D9 is different because, I mean, recreational marijuana is not legal in Texas at all. You know, there's a little bit of medical use, but you got to be dying of pancreatic cancer to get it. Okay. So it's not legal here. However, you can go to the shitty mart down the street and buy D9 beverages all day long, and nobody's going to stop you. And so what we have here is a failure to communicate. So anyway, fast forward to last week, I got invited to speak to the American Beverage licensees, which had their convention here in San Antonio downtown. And right after that, the Texas Package Store Association had their convention right across the street. And so since I had a badge for ABL, I could just walk into the Texas package stores. So that's all the independent liquor store operators in the state. And they're a very strong lobby here in Texas. Basically, the reason for their being, or the main reason for their being, is to stop HEB from getting into the liquor business. Let's just call a spade a spade. All right? And Walmart and Costco. And, you know, if they could, they'd probably keep Total Wine out of the business too. And I think they've tried, because there's a residency requirement, but, you know, Commerce Clause and all that bullshit. So, you know, Texas is a free-for-all. And when somebody said, how many in this room are selling D9 beverages, a lot of people raised their hand. And so what I've heard through back channels is that nutty lieutenant governor we have, Dan Patrick, who's like ultra conservative, he has instructed, you know, thank God the Texas legislature only meets every other year. They only meet in odd number years, kind of like only when I work. I only work odd number years. So when they're in session is when I work. And they're gonna, you know, so they're not in session. Thank God, because they can't, you know, do no harm. So they're gonna go in session in the second week in January. And Dan Patrick has said to the committee that kind of rules that, he's like, hey, look at this and look at closing the loophole. However, he's got 6,000 or 7,000 licensed hemp D9 accounts in this state. And that's a pretty big constituency. And they're kind of getting together and kind of realizing they're going to lose this profitable product. So it's going to be interesting. And the reason I mentioned what's going on in Texas, because I sense that this is going on in many states across the country. So when I spoke, and Sarah and I spoke at the ABL meeting, the guy right after me, and I got questions, and people asked me about D9, and I said what I knew about it. And then the guy after me, he comes from the, you know, it's basically a federal
Attach.
a federal association that represents state associations of states that have legal recreational marijuana and what we call big marijuana. You know, basically just meaning like in California and Colorado and places where it's legal, those people don't want D9 coming in because it's screwing with their business, their dispensary business. And as we know, beverages don't sell well in dispensaries. They don't have the room. And I don't know if I've ever said this on this podcast, but beer is heavy. Beverages are heavy. And it takes a lot of place to store them, and people want to buy them cold. So they're not set up for it. And then you've got Minnesota that accidentally legalized it, and then everything went crazy, and they realized they had a political situation where people wanted it to stay. And so they codified it, which you would think that's what Texas would do, but maybe not. We don't know. Now, when you look at Missouri last week, also you had the governor just making an executive order saying, hey, this is illegal. Shut it down. You had Massachusetts do the same thing earlier this year. You had Alabama do the same thing. Alabama took the governor to court that the court said, no, you can't do that. This is legal. The farm bill says it could be legal. So you have so you're like, Missouri, that's where AB's based. Well, guess who's on the board of this attach? Adolphus Bush V. Who's Adolphus Bush V? And then you have Bill Coors. Or his name's Scott Coors, but his name's Bill Scott Coors. So you have these beer scions on this board of the big marijuana representing that are fighting the D9 people, and it's no wonder Missouri cut it down. If I were a beer scion and I were looking around for things to do, I'd look at what my great grandfather did, which was get into a business that's burgeoning and starting, and marijuana and THC is that business where they can make a name for themselves. So I don't blame them for doing it. But you have a situation now where you have wholesalers that want D9 beverages for the most part because it's their only hedge against recreational marijuana. Let's face it. And then you've got big marijuana saying, hey, we don't want this. We want everything through dispensaries. We want to go through the system. So anyway, this fella, Chris, who's, great, nice guy, very knowledgeable about it, he kind of laid it out. And he believes, and I kind of agree with him because he would know, the feds are going to close this hemp loophole. But he even pointed out, who cares? THC is illegal anyway. It's still a scheduled drug, whether it's been made through CBD or not. And the DEA is not going to enforce it. And the TTB can't enforce it because their mandate is for alcohol only. So unless you put alcohol in these drinks, TTB can't touch you. And where do wholesalers' federal licenses come from? They come from the TTB. So the beer wholesalers and the wine and spirits wholesalers, they have nothing to lose, at least from the Fed standpoint. And they might have some risk because, again, the FDA hasn't approved it as safe. And if it turns out somehow, 5 years from now, we all start growing gills out of our ears or something, and then they might have a liability, but that's highly unlikely. So that's kind of where we sit here in the D9 beverage space. And I think this year and next year, we will have a real better, clear knowledge state by state of where this goes. It doesn't surprise me that Massachusetts would just say it's illegal. Massachusetts was founded by Quakers. It was founded. It's the home of federalism. It's the home of John Adams. They didn't let women show their knees until like the 70s. So, Massachusetts, of course.
They also have a recreational market.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you guys
the
have
big
noticed,
thing.
but the people who get the recreational dispensary licenses tend to be like related to the governor, or their dad is a congressman, or, they're, in other words, they're powerful interests. And so I think it behooves states to just, the public wants it, just tax it, get it regulated and tax it. Because right now in Texas, it is kind of ridiculous how many places, and I don't even know if you need to produce an ID to get it.
I think the last map I saw, half of the states were some form of unregulated, and I think that's going to change pretty darn fast. And it's going to matter, to your point, and we've talked about this before, whether they have a marijuana, whether marijuana is legal or not in the state. It'll probably, in most cases, go through the marijuana channel, right? Like Bianca can talk about the latest in California. That's about to be decided. And like in Texas, well, Texas is a little bit different politics, but in other states where there isn't codified MJ, then that needs to be regulated just for D9, and it will be. And the most interesting thing to me, and then I'll shut up, is, I think, and you kind of hinted at it, Harry, is that we're seeing a situation where beer wholesalers are maybe being pitted against big marijuana, right? Because these beer wholesalers, even some of the very big ones, want this, right? And I was talking to Austin Sawyer from Countermeasures, smart guy, Smart and sharp, smart.
Yeah.
Smart guy.
He's a smart guy.
He's a
Sharp.
smart
That's
guy.
different,
You
though.
know that guy.
Yeah.
And he works with some of these brands like High Rise. And he's like, look, I mean, distributors want it, retailers want it. It's like 3 to 4 times the GP of beer, some of these brands, right? There's like, they did like 100 million in revenue of these beverages in Minnesota. Like he sees a time where we do like 500 million revenues of them soon. So like, there's definitely pull, obviously, and distributors want it. So, but how far are they willing to, on the record and in the legislature, go against the other side, whether it's the Dan Patrick's or the marijuana? And I don't know, right? MBWA hasn't put out anything on it. I don't think they're too keen on it at this point because, you talked about federal and 21st Amendment stuff. There is no analogous 21st Amendment for cannabis or D9, right? And so there's definitely still some trickiness.
Right. Yeah, those are good points because, yeah, I mean, there's no reason for the MBWA to even get involved at this point, right? Because federally it's illegal. So they don't even, they shouldn't, it would be inappropriate, I think, for them to even weigh in on this. But at the state level, who has the most power in the state legislatures? I would say beer wholesalers are number 1 or number 2 in probably 80% of the states. Like maybe the realtors used to be and the car dealers, but not now. The realtors have been knocked off their pedestal, so they're gone. And car dealers are slowly getting chipped away at by Tesla. Beer wholesalers are the shits. And if they want to spend political capital to get this done, now's the time.
Yeah, the question is, will it? Yeah, it's interesting. Who was it, guys? Remind me. Somebody here in Texas, a big wholesaler. I think it was maybe Benny Keith picked up Eighth Wonder. So, in Texas, you have a big wholesaler
Silver
in it.
Eagle. Yeah.
Silver Eagle, that's what it is. That's right.
Yeah.
It is Silver Eagle. So, and you wouldn't think they would touch this being Silver Eagle, but they have, right? And so theoretically, will they push back this effort to, certainly though they want it to be more regulated. Like again, Austin was talking about some of these wholesalers when they get in, making retailers sign something that says we will only merchandise this with alcohol, with 21 plus signs, and on-premise guys saying we will only, give 2 servings of 5 milligrams, like signing things, because obviously if this gets out of hand, it's no bueno, right? Like it'd be DIA for everyone. Personally, I am kind of surprised it's gotten this far. Like when we first started covering the California thing, and obviously the governor is against these beverages and stuff because he's in the pocket of big marijuana. I was like, that's it. This thing is done. But then it to your point, became obvious that no, this is a state by state thing, and it's going to be very different in each state depending.
I heard that Governor Newsom is only going to allow it to be sold in Paneras.
Hard charged lemonade.
Right.
Yeah. I think big marijuana is caught in a tricky situation because they want to see it go away, but at the same time they're like, well, what if this continues? And then we have the capabilities to do this, so should we get in on this as well? Kind of like Curaleaf is doing right now, where they're like got one foot in one camp, one foot in the other. I feel like big marijuana, I'm not sure why they're not, instead of just trying to ban D9 and all these other derivatives, of just pushing for more access to retail.
Oh yeah.
Saying, hey, we don't know what this type of product is, and we don't know how it was formed, and who knows where it came from, but we have the same exact thing, which is measured, signed off by, whatever liquor commission controlled, some sort of regulating body. And we can actually put that into retail and feel confident about it. And that's where I feel like the argument should be, instead of getting rid of one, trying to push one that's safer into expanded retail.
But there's a difference between the edible gummies and cookies and the drinks. And I think that's where the beer distributors that want to carry D9 drinks and the D9 makers themselves need to be making that distinction to the legislatures that are considering this. They need carve outs for beverages because a
Right.
5 milligram or 10 milligram drink is way different than a 100 milligram cookie. I guess in Missouri, they had pictures of like these copycat kind of kids snacks like lifesavers and things. And I mean, it was a total ripoff of their trademark. Like it looked exactly the same as what's sold, to kids. And so, but that's different. And that's kind of a white space, I think, for beverage makers to make that distinction that we're not a bad actor. We're not like them.
You can eat a whole cookie and not know what you've done. It takes a little more effort to drink 10 5 milligram drinks. I mean, a kid's not going to chug 10 mil, the danger is different in a drink. And also it's heavy. I mean, I keep coming back to that because distributing flour and gummies is, anybody can do it in a station wagon. You distribute a lot of it. You could have a whole route in a very small vehicle. I mean, a beverage is heavy. You have to have industrial vehicles to do it, and you already have licensed distributors who know how to merchandise it appropriately. It makes sense to separate it out, beverages specifically, just like you said, Bianca, and have that be a separate thing. I don't think you're ever going to see flour being sold in a store like this. Yeah, nothing ever turns out like you think it will.
But we are dealing with a new wave of just synthetic or new type of experimental drugs coming out into market, whether it be D9, D8, THC, all this stuff that is emerging because there is no recreational market. And then you have Kratom, you have Kava, you have all this stuff that a lot of the younger kids, I think, are interested in, and it pops up on social media and TikTok all the time. And so if you eliminate one, it's just going to be something else.
Well,
building
I
on
mean,
top of it.
the way that Chris, this lawyer, he said that he feels like it's very likely that Delta-9 will be just regulated out of existence.
Should be.
And synthetic THC, because that really is getting into Frankenstein type science and chemical I was just watching a video on chemical reactions when you walked in. So yeah, I think if a state's going to do anything, they need to get rid of all that bullshit. And it has to be tested just like beer. You got to, periodically you got to test the alcohol content. You have to test the ingredients. You have to know exactly what's in the can. And it should be the same regulation for all those beverages. And so I see a bifurcated market. And what's the latest in California? I know they're swinging back around and looking at it, and they're always in session. Those guys, they don't give they will pass laws left, right, and center. They pass enough laws to get rid of Chevron, their largest employer. It's awesome. I mean, I read an article that California was considering nationalizing Chevron, like making the state buying it. And I was like, oh, you think can you imagine California running a refinery? How that would go? You think gas is expensive now?
Yeah.
It's
So anyway,
$5 here.
Oh, Jesus.
I'll
What did
FedEx you a gallon of gasoline from Texas. It'll still be cheaper than buying it at the pump.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah, gas is heavy too.
It is. So the latest with this bill in California that if it were signed would effectively eliminate the D9 market, which really just came up this year with Total Wine starting to carry the beverages. There's a coalition of hemp beverage makers that are they've hired a lobbyist and they're putting some pressure on the legislature. It went through a couple of committees and kind of passed quickly as is, even though there was some pushback from those hemp guys. And then they kind of got smart and hired a lobbyist, probably a bit too late, but they still did it. And the legislature was on vacation or out of session in July. So they just came back this week. It's going to be at the appropriations committee level next week. And I intercepted a letter today that they're circulating to send to legislators, that they've got a bunch of brands signed on to it. Looks like, cans on there that Jen mentioned, Climbing Kites, a bunch of other brands. But they're basically asking for that carve out that I kind of mentioned for beverage, not for all these other edibles that they're not making and not interested in representing, who, are arguably the bad actors, because of how high dose these, edibles are. So they're asking that the state allow them to sell 5 milligram drinks or less, which is low dose, in regular retail channel, and that it be regulated by the TTB in the state, essentially.
Right. Because I will say the FDA really hasn't acted on this except for those candies and those edibles that look like that are ripping off trademarks.
Yeah.
I love that the FDA is only concerned when somebody's trademark is being impugned upon, not the health of the public, just that companies might lose money on their trademarks. If you think the U.S. government ain't looking after your business, just think again, folks. Think again. So, well, let's talk about Molson Coors. Down their shipments were down 8%. Or is that SDRs?
In the U.S.
Okay, so depletions down 8%. We kind of figured that was coming because they had a bad comp. So, what were you guys' impressions of their earnings?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, I figured it was pretty much, if we had written it up yesterday without seeing the release, I think we would have gotten pretty darn close, right? I mean, it was the depletions trend was kind of the inverse of the really tough comp trend. We know they made a big deal about having overshipped in the first quarter, and that will come back later in the year. But I mean, they hammered the point that they keep hammering, which is they've kept like 80% of the gains that they made last year. And if you look now versus 2022, they're still up a couple share points on their top brands, and we didn't get a whole lot. I mean, Gavin said June was a little bit better. One of the surprising things that I heard was that the on-premise, he said, is doing a little bit better than the off, which floors me because
I keep hearing that lately too.
It may be in like small, I mean, and I know that we've covered some things this year that said the on-premise is doing better than last year, but if we're talking about pre-COVID, of course, that's a completely different story. And in fact, I don't know if I won't mention who, but I toured a distributor warehouse recently. They're doing great, so it's nothing to that end of things. But I asked them about draft because I went and I saw, their cooler and their kegs and stuff, and I was like, "How is it now versus COVID?" And it's basically they have a little over half of the kegs that they had pre-COVID. So if that tells you about draft dynamics, that's pretty interesting. But what else, Jay? I mean, I mean, to me, no surprises.
Yeah. The only trend I believe they called out for a brand throughout the whole entire call was for Coors Banquet. I mean, they grouped, to show that Coors Light, Miller Lite, Coors Banquet, they lost some share, but they're still above 2022 and have 80% of what they gained. But the only growth trend they highlighted was for Coors Banquet, and everything else was just kind of talk of, well, there's runway here, we're working on this, promising signs here, but that was the only real growth trend they highlighted. And it's funny because going from Molson Coors earnings call to AB's earnings call last week, they both are kind of caught in this weird portfolio balance where Molson Coors is kind of stuck with the middle of their big meaty premium brands, and Gavin said on the call, we have work to do with premiumization. AB, they've got everything but the middle. They
Right.
have Mick Ultra, and then they have Busch Light on value. And so it's funny just watching those two companies kind of figuring out how the hell we can balance this out.
They ought to merge. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we tried that.
yeah, I don't know. They're trying to break up Google. I hope they do, just for the fun of it.
Just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
But-
I mean, and then you have Constellation that's all in the high end, and they've proven that can be successful, but it's hard to just get there, especially when you have the iconic, historic brands that AB and Molson Coors have.
Yeah, and I got to think in that scenario, AB has the more winning mix there. You've got below
Yeah.
premium and you've got the high end. That doesn't sound bad for this consumer right now.
yeah. I
The
mean,
middle is being
I would
squeezed.
like to point out that recession that we've been predicting for the last 3 years, I think it's here.
Yeah,
I
I think
we
it's
can,
here.
I think we can call it. I mean, unemployment's up like 22% in the last year. The Dow dropped 1,000 points. Japan is just in shambles. I mean, if you want the easy version of that is that they had negative interest rates, so you could borrow yen at a negative rate, use that to buy treasury bonds and get 5% rate and just make free money.
That's
That's
awesome.
crazy.
When Japan
Ruined
raises
it,
the
Japan.
rate, they gotta close the bet, close the trade. And how do you do that? You have to buy yen. And so to do that, you have to sell all your equities. Even Nvidia, you have to even sell Nvidia. And so that's why every stock just cratered. And good God, I mean, the housing inventory is way up. Even if you want to sell your house, people are taking 20% haircuts. I mean, I think I keep in mind, I have been saying this for literally 4 years. The same,
Lester Jones is going to email you, Harry.
I
and be
know,
like,
and I've been
"Roar."
Lester, email me this time. I think I'm right this time. I think the consumer is finally out of STEMI money. I know I'm out of it.
Tip me money.
I mean,
Yeah, I know
I'm
not
done.
gonna go.
They've
So-
been out.
I've been, yeah. I mean, so yeah, I think, and what does that mean?
Busch Light
Some people
peach.
think it's good for
That's what
beer,
it
right?
means.
I mean, it's if you're drinking high dollar bourbon, you might switch to beer. It's a better value, but definitely if you wanted to call it Coors Banquet and Busch Light, Pabst, Lone Star, I mean, those are probably going to be the winners. So it's just a bunch of bullshit, And then
At the end of
everybody's
the day.
oh, we're going to lower the interest rate by 0.5 point. That's going to do anything. That doesn't help anybody unless you're buying a house. God.
The answer is Bitcoin, which is also down.
I mean, you might be right, Jen. That's all that's left. That's all that's left. That's a safe investment is Bitcoin. When Bitcoin's your safest thing, then that we got problems. Chevron, refineries. All right. Well, anything else that was interesting the last week or so?
I was looking at scans for the latest week, I think to like July 28th, and I was expecting a little improvement because that week encompassed opening ceremonies of the Olympics, and that's an event that we don't get all the time, and a lot of people get together and watch it, and that was the worst week beer had of July, off premise.
Right.
So that can either go back to our point of maybe the on premise is doing a little bit better and people are going back out to that channel to watch these types of events, or people just still feel pressured and maybe just didn't watch it.
They didn't drink Mick
beer
Ultra.
watching it.
Yeah.
Right. They were drinking D9 beverages. Were there any weather patterns? I mean, I know Florida just took another hurricane, of course. Feel bad for those guys. They just get hammered one after the other.
I don't remember crazy weather then, but who knows? I mean, there was a crazy heat wave, but that's been the case. Although I
mean,
left.
but imports were down 4% for the week. Modelo didn't even grow. I think the only thing that grew, the only beer segment that grew was non-alc beer.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Which fits
Constellation
with the
was flat.
Olympics.
yeah,
When's the last time Constellation was flat? I mean,
not often.
you know, I think what we need to do as an industry is just to get together, maybe in the next 3, 4, 6 months, maybe even January, like maybe mid-January would probably be a good time. And we should probably meet like in a warm climate
Yeah.
where there's a beach,
Mm-hmm.
A state that's kind of easy to get to from the East Coast and the Midwest. That's funny you should say that because we got the Beer, Wine, and Spirits Summit coming up right around the corner, January 12th through 14th. We got some great speakers lined up. Yeah, we got your Jim Cook. We got a retailer lined up. We're going to have a distributor panel. We've got, who else, Jen?
Bill Newlands, Bill Schufelt, Crowns
Two
and
Bills.
Hops. We've got someone from Tilray, TBA Who, and who knows what they'll have bought by then. So it should be timely.
Yeah, right.
And like you said, some
they'll
of
definitely
retailers,
have bought something by then.
they will definitely have bought something by then.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, we've got Pete Marino in his new job at the whiskey joint. He's going to be speaking on the wine and spirit side. We've got the Stefanchi family. We've got, I know Sarah's got some people lined up. I can't remember who they are. But anyway, just go to beernet.com if you want to get your early bird ticket because you do save some money by doing it before. Is it September 1st, right?
yes.
Yeah, so just a couple weeks away. Beernet.com. I'd love to see you guys there. It's at the Breakers, which is my favorite place on earth. Like when I'm feeling sad or anxious, what I do is I just close my eyes and think of the Breakers. And you can't think of the Breakers without thinking of Mr. Ponce. And, God bless Mr. Ponce. He's passed away several years ago, but his spirit lives on. I'll leave a link in the description because there is a YouTube video of him giving a tour of the property, one of his last. I tried to have him embalmed and just kind of set up in glass like linen. But apparently, even in Florida, they have laws against that sort of thing. You would think that would be kosher, but no.
Harry, I'll never forget one of your summit speeches was entirely about Ponce.
Yeah.
The entire thing was, and people were like, "We paid for this shit." But I'm happy to report that since then, Harry's opening speaches have been absolutely.
You can't deny that
riveting.
Mr. Ponce is a gem. We
was a
lost a
gem.
real veteran. I remember that summit because they took Mr. Ponce's video off YouTube, and we made such a stink about it that they had to put it back up. I told everybody, I was like, here's the email for the manager at the Breakers. Email him right now and get Mr. Ponce back on YouTube. They didn't put him back on YouTube. They put him like an obscure like Vimeo it's hard to find.
Unlisted link.
Yeah, because I will say that there are certain parts of that video were a little bit problematic, if I remember. He was a Southern old gentleman. I mean, he came from a different time. Anyway.
We should make sure to put Mr. Ponce on.
Enough about Mr. Ponce. All right. Well, listen, another great Wednesday warehouse. Thank everybody for being on and have a great rest of the week. And we'll see you next time.